Good morning, everybody. Today we have a very interesting show. Unfortunately, Senator Black will not be with us, but he has set up quite the guest to join us today. That will be Jim Jatras, who is a former U.S. diplomat and GOP foreign policy advisor, and more importantly, a friend of the show. So I'm going to go ahead and bring him in so we can discuss different topics such as the update in Ukraine and Russia, and then we'll pivot to other war drives that are happening with America. So without further ado, let me go ahead and bring in Jim. Jim, nice to see you. How are you doing?
Likewise, Morgan. Always a pleasure.
Yes. I just wanted to let people know we actually had the pleasure of meeting each other, and we didn't know that we were going to be on the show again. So it's always
right.
Nice.
I didn't make the connection.
Yeah.
Remember, I'm an old guy, Morgan. I can't figure these things out.
You know what? I sometimes it takes a minute for me too. So it was a nice surprise, and I'm glad to see you again. And we can have these discussions. We got into some nice discussions at the Russian embassy on the U.S. Republic and it being a fight worth having and what that really takes. So let's it'd be interesting to kind of get into the weeds of that in this discussion today. So we wanted to start off by speaking on Ukraine and Russia. There's a lot that's happening. I think with the Trump administration, we really had this glimmer of hope that things were going to roll back and we were going to see some glimmers of hope when it comes to diplomacy and peace. So could you, give us an update?
Well, I think the key word here is escalation. There were people early on in the Trump administration, even before the administration was installed in January, that were very, very hopeful. Trump's going to make a deal. There'll be a grand bargain. We'll have spheres of influence, all that kind of, normal stuff that before 1914. And I was skeptical from the start that was going to happen or even could happen. As far as I was concerned, I wrote about this in December. The only possible approach would be from the West, including from the Trump administration, would be to try to sell the Russians on another truce. Put lipstick on a pig, pretend it's a peace settlement, but it's really just a truce so we can have a DMZ like in Korea, have their Ukraine, our Ukraine, and then a perpetual Cold War while we move on to Iran, China, whatever is next on the list, Venezuela. I think we finally got to the point where nobody, including even the Russians, who are incredibly naive, it seems to me, when it comes to their American partners, have finally figured out there's not going to be any deal. End of discussion. There never was the possibility. There's not going to be any deal. They were going to have to figure out what they want to do next. There was an indication from Dmitry Medvedev that they finally have figured this out, that they're not going to be pulling their punches anymore and going after the Kiev regime based on the mirage of a deal. I don't know if that's true or not, to tell the truth. Frankly, I don't know that Mr. Putin is quite there yet. Meanwhile, on the American side, Trump is zigzagging and squirming around trying to figure out something that will prevent him from being the guy holding the bag when this all goes south in Ukraine. He's slapping sanctions on energy now. He pulled back on the Tomahawks, even though a big reason for that is we don't have the Tomahawks to send, much less the people that can operate them. But what he has done, evidently, and this is extremely serious, is that despite his denials, we are evidently getting targeting information to the British and the French with their Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles for deep strikes inside Russian territory. And that would also probably point to doing the same thing with German Taurus missiles in the not too distant future. So in terms of what the Russian concerns are, that there are long-range missiles being launched, let's be honest, by NATO, not by the Ukrainians, into Russia, that's something that they're going to have to take into account. How much longer they're going to just sit there and pretend, it doesn't matter, we'll just stick to the plan, it doesn't matter. I don't really know. So this is escalating. There's simply no two ways around that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, I think in my perception, a lot of the statesmanship, sometimes you do have to appear maybe naive but it's just in this good faith effort to continually try and come to the table in good faith. I wouldn't espouse someone like Putin to be someone that's naive, given his interview that he did with Tucker Carlson, where he speaks about this bureaucratic body that goes over the president's head when he was trying to get into NATO. And so he is in perfect understanding that there is these other elements, these dark bodies, if you want to go as far to say like this deep state that is going to continue this war drive regardless of the president's wishes. So I think that is, in my personal opinion, that is kind of important to note when it comes to dealing with diplomacy, is that what may appear to be, someone being naive is someone that's just trying to continually make a good faith effort for peace. And that may strip them of this brute strength in appearance, but really I think that is actually what shows true strength, is to continually come to the table even though you're skeptical of how good faith of actors your other people that are coming to the table. Would you kind of make that concession, or would you say that the Russians have been naive I'm
well past that. I think part of the problem is when you're normal people dealing with psychopaths, it's very hard to admit that look, I'm not calling for insults or behaving emotionally or any of that sort. But when you get to the point when you realize there's simply no way to deal in good faith with people, that they can never deal with you in good faith, at what point does it become counterproductive? Again, I'm not saying you say, fine, if you want to talk, we'll talk. But at some point you behave on the ground differently if you know that there's not going to be a deal. Again, that's something I've been calling for that I haven't ever gotten a good answer from. I do tend to get the usual stuff. Oh, no, the Russians know what they're doing. This is driven purely by military considerations. As I say, Mr. Medvedev spilled the beans on that in the last day or so by saying, and essentially they have been pulling their punches because they were still hoping for a deal somewhere. Once you realize that was a mirage, what do you do next? Why are they not targeting the Kiev regime? Why have they not targeted the presidential administration, the SBU, military intelligence, the Duma, the Rada? I have a little slip of the tongue there. The Rada and the rest. Why are they not targeting, as Mr. Medvedev indicated they might be doing, the Banderist militias that are still the guys, the goons on the ground with the guns in Kiev that hold any regime in Kiev hostage? Why are they not doing that? Now, are they going to start doing that? I don't know. But at some point, if they're serious about realizing that this was a mirage, that you can talk to these people, you think they would behave differently. Because my concern is that as they keep with the slow grind, the slowly approach, the attrition approach, not only are they killing off vast numbers of Ukrainian men who don't even want to be there, and they're getting killed, and a lot of Russians are getting killed too, not as many as the Ukrainians, and it's a very lopsided attrition, but nonetheless, a lot of Russians are getting killed. But the guys who are actually causing the problem, they sleep soundly in their beds at night. They know they're not being targeted. They know that nobody's trying to kill them. Why? Why does that make any sense militarily? Now, people tell me there's good reason. I think Mr. Medvedev has pointed out it was not a military reason, it was a political reason. And have they gotten beyond that yet? I don't know. We'll find out. My concern is that by pursuing this approach, they're allowing the other side to keep escalating, which is what we're doing now. I don't even know what the next thing is going to be after these long-range strikes, because every time the Russians come back barking and say, oh, there'll be consequences, there are no consequences against the US, against the British, against the French, against the Germans. There are only consequences against the Ukrainians. Like anybody in Washington or London or Paris cares how many Ukrainians the Russians kill. So, again, there are no consequences for them. They, as far as they're concerned, it's a freebie. We'll just keep throwing Ukrainians down the rat hole. And as long as the Russians keep killing them, no skin off of us. What do we care? We'll just keep escalating.
Yeah, that's the true nature of this proxy war. It's really thrown these Ukrainians and under the guise of protecting their sovereignty. It is really just destroyed the whole generations of Ukrainian men. I like to say, I get a lot of the the backlash, being an American, kind of critiquing the American policy in this war as being a Putin puppet, not caring about Ukrainians, when I think that that is the exact opposite. When I'm sitting there and saying that entire generations of men have been annihilated, I actually do care about sovereignty of Ukrainians and the Ukrainian statesmanhood, and the fact that you want to continue to accelerate this war shows that you truly don't. I think that we want to give people an update on kind of what has transpired, which is really this meeting that Trump actually initiated with Putin in Helsinki, which kind of was this glimmer of hope. I wanted to roll it back and maybe connect it to a different event. When there was these peace talks that happened right before the spider web operation, where Ukraine had the drones in Russia, you had a lot of hopefulness that the Russians and Americans were meeting, and it was a lot like the talks that Iran and the U.S. were having right before Israel conducted their strikes.
Right.
So there is this repetition of policy that is not in good faith, where you have this smoke and mirrors. Oh, we're going to have this talk, while you have these operatives, maybe CIA, MI6, that are conducting these black ops operations that show that there really is no good faith. Do you kind of see that might have been the case here? And if so, maybe that would have been a good thing that Trump pulled back. That's purely speculation here, but I think that it's important for us to note this playbook that has occurred in the past, where we have this diplomatic talks while there are other things happen in the background.
Yeah, I don't think Trump can be absolved in any way for that kind of deception. I mean, I think sometimes the tendency of people is to say, well, Trump is talking good faith, but the deep state is behind the scenes sabotaging things or something like that. I don't believe that for a New York minute. I mean, I believe that he, like you talked about the attack on Iran. Even as the negotiators are going to Qatar, and then of course the Israelis bomb them there, or try to kill them, and which they couldn't have done without American assistance and or complicity, not just notice. And then you have the same thing going on with the Russians. We're talking to them at the same time. We've got the spiderweb attack going on inside of. By the way, and the methodology was very, very similar to what the Israelis were doing inside Iran when they launched their attack on Iran. Again, how dumb do you have to be on the other side to realize, or at least pretending to be dumb, to realize you're dealing with people who only act in bad faith? I can't help but thinking of that scene in the movie Mars Attacks, where the president, Jack Nicholson, is talking to his French counterpart, who says, "Monsieur President, we have reached an agreement with the Martian ambassador." And he says, "Get out of there, get out of there." And you hear them massacred by the Martians. I mean, when you're negotiating with somebody and then you try to kill the people you're negotiating with, doesn't the light bulb go on at some point?
I mean, that's what I'm fearful for, is that you kind of have this destruction of diplomatic talks, or even the attempt to have the diplomatic talks. I'm very thankful that we have sound heads in the Russian government that, even when we continue to poke the bear, push beyond their supposed red line, they still don't go as far as we initially probably would go if we had this red line and they had it's an awful way to think, but it is just kind of the reality that we've pushed beyond their red line, that if they were kind of these as reactive and psychotic as some of our leaders are, we would already be in a nuclear war. So I am very kind of thankful of these.
I have to disagree, Morgan. I really have to disagree. I think their restraint in their being the adults in the room is actually leading to further escalation. I think that if they were more serious about enforcing red lines, that we would see a lot more circumspection and care taken by their Western partners and escalation. What they're actually doing is leading to further escalation. They're inviting escalation. Nobody in Washington, nobody in London, Paris, Berlin takes their red line seriously, and with good reason, for the very reason you point out. They've been so restrained. They say, they're weak. They're scared of us. We can escalate all we want. We don't have to take their red line seriously. Where's that going to get us at the end of the day?
Yeah. Well, I would concede that yes, that is the hubris that the Western leaders do have. But in reality, what you're looking at is probably a nuclear conflict if they were to follow through with these red lines. So that's kind of
no. I think that's where we're going to end up if they don't do something a little more like, for example, just case in point, if I were in Moscow calling the shots and the British are firing storm shadows into Russian territory instead of just hitting targets in Ukraine. First off, there are also reports that the Russians have avoided hitting concentrations of NATO personnel inside Ukraine who are fair game. I mean, they know they're Americans there and British. And look, I'm not calling for a killing of Americans, but if I was sitting in Russia, why would you hold those people harmless while killing more Ukrainians? You'd think you'd be especially targeting those guys. With regard to the British, who in my opinion, are the worst of the worst. They deserve everything they get. Yeah, if I were the Russians, I would say, well, all right, at 0800 tomorrow morning, we're going to hit one of those 2 British bases in Cyprus with Russian missiles with no warheads, just kinetic energy, and as a demonstration that you're vulnerable and you better get your people out of there because we don't want to kill them right now, but hit those bases and say, don't do that again. Or the next one will be against a live target. Now, you could do that as a demonstration. I think it would get their attention. Maybe it wouldn't. Maybe they would say, oh, well, they're still pussyfooting around. I don't really know. But if the way they're going now, they're inviting escalation. And I hold the Russians as much to blame for it as I do the maniacs in the Western capitals, because they're encouraging it. They're inviting it.
Yeah, I guess that would, I agree with you in the sense that Iran really showed up. When they were kind of pushed against, they showed that they could get across the Iron Dome, they could reach those spots, and that your bases, Israeli bases, were not going to be protected. So I do kind of see what you're saying in the sense that you show up in a position of power where you really exert how far you could go if you wanted to. Yes, and I wanted to get your take on the Trump Truth Social post, where he said Ukraine could potentially take back all of its territory with the help of Europe. There's 2 diverging views where it is this acceleration or it is this abandonment of the American government to Ukraine. I want to see where you kind of stand on that issue and pertaining to that post.
You're going to put the post up, or should I address it now?
You just address it. Sorry, it's such a long post. It's a
okay. No, yeah, I know which one we're talking
a novel,
about. I don't think it's abandonment. I think it's the same, shell game that they've been playing from the beginning. That Pete Hegseth has been made very, very clear that we simply want to shift the burden for this war onto the Europeans, but we'll still be calling the shots. We'll be using our European puppets as a cat's paw to keep this war going and to hopefully prevent a total NATO defeat in Ukraine. So that's what he's doing. Now, in terms of saying, oh, Ukraine can take back all of their territory, maybe somebody delusional like, General Keith and what's his name, Cornflake Kellogg, whatever his name is, thinks that they can do that. I don't think Trump even believes that. I think that was just, Trump arted the deal. I'll say this, I'll say that, thrashing around rhetorically, knowing it's not true. I do think that what he's trying to do is trying to batter both sides, the Russians and the Ukrainians, into coming to a deal, because he can, this will be his 88th war that he solved or whatever it is. Because what he wants is the appearance of having solved the problem and walking away as a winner, while the thing sits there on a slow burn for how many years to come, with the Europeans suffering the consequences economically and are just getting to sell whatever weapons we can produce. Again, he wants the appearance of winning, but at the same time to avoid the reality of losing, which so far the Russians have accommodated.
Yeah, and Keith Kellogg is a very interesting and I would say not a good faith actor in this. His daughter has this
Hmm.
NGO that is directly its whole existence is tied to the continuation of the war in Ukraine. So I think that's important to note, and I think that's a very clear conflict of interest. Even so much so, I think this NGO boasted, excuse me, that they had Keith
Hmm.
Kellogg go to Ukraine in order to come back to the Congress and try and secure more weapon shipments to Ukraine. I think that's absolutely preposterous that he's put in a role that is supposed to be this diplomatic, statesman and show up in good faith. So I think that's important to note. Um, I think when we know this military industrial complex that also extends past
Hmm.
America, it's, NATO is a big part of it, the weapons deals. There always has to be a continued conflict that we have to pivot to.
Hmm.
I think you make a good point when you say that Trump is pushing the can down the road when it comes to creating these peace deals in these different regions. I think we see that with the peace deal
Hmm.
in Gaza and Israel. What I think is the major point that this is going to it's important to note that Israel is still conducting airstrikes. This
Hmm.
imaginary yellow line, people or Palestinians are still dying. Um, the major point that I think that this is all going to break down is, I guess, two major points. Is the Israel is claiming that the peace deal won't hold up if A, Hamas does not disarm, and B, if they do not get
Hmm.
the bodies of the hostages that are probably under rubble and cannot be extracted, which in turn will only have more conflict down the road. You will have different militia groups. We already see that happening where Israel has
Yeah.
basically out in the open have said that they are funding and propping up groups to go against Hamas.
Hmm.
This is just going to continually have more conflict down the road. And I think you'll see the same thing in Ukraine. And so Trump's kind of posturing like he's doing this great peace work is essentially he's just trying to kick the can down the road, for another so years before another conflict pops up. We had this Helsinki meeting that Trump had canceled. I want to play a little clip of
Hmm.
Putin's remarks on that, and then kind of get your comments on that.
In our last telephone conversation, both the meeting itself and its venue were proposed by the American side, and I agreed to this. But I expressed my opinion on this matter and said that, of course, such meetings need to be well prepared. It would be a mistake for both me and the US president to approach this lightly and come away from this meeting without the expected result. I must say that the US president agreed with this, agreed completely, and said that on their part, a number of officials from the current administration would work on preparing for this meeting. Firstly, there is nothing new here. Yes, they are serious for us. That is clear. And they will have certain consequences. But they will not significantly affect our economic well-being. In his first term as president, it is well known that President Trump imposed the largest number of sanctions that had ever been imposed against the Russian Federation. Today, they have two aspects, purely political and purely economic. As for the political aspect, what we are talking about is, of course, an attempt to put pressure on Russia. But no self-respecting country and no self-respecting people ever make decisions under pressure.
So that's kind of what I want to get your comment on is these continued sanctions.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
I think that it only serves to hurt the American side because I think we sanction 2/3 of the whole globe, and I think that is why you see this acceleration in this alliance, this BRICS alliance, because that you have the majority of this country that is sick of sanctions being used as a weapon. So what is your take on that? Are they truly even effective in a country like Russia? I think that is one thing that you see a lot of these countries that are joining BRICS, because they actually got this glimmer of hope that Russian economy really did not fall to the ground with these sanctions, that there is this, new emerging superpowers that are going to be able to combat, the American hegemony and the power of the US dollar.
Well, as you said, the power of the U.S. dollar, I think that's really the key to it. And of course, Trump has been very big at saying, our great dollar, we have to defend our dollar, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of people are pointing out, well, maybe not immediately, but certainly for the not long term, but near term, he's undermining the dollar, because people realize that we are not a reliable financial partner, that we're simply going to use the dollar as a weapon, use the world financial system as a weapon against them. And so, yeah, they're looking for alternatives to that. Do they actually have that alternative available to them right now? I'm not sure they do. It's been pointed out, for example, I think by Gilbert Doctorow, that the Chinese are impervious to the American threats on their energy supply with secondary sanctions. The Indians are really not. The Indians don't really have anything they can withhold from us, like rare earths or something like that. So they're actually somewhat vulnerable. Whether they can stand strong and defend their sovereign interests or not, I think is going to be a real test case in terms of the BRICS as an alternative to the American-dominated world financial system. Back to what Mr. Putin said about thinking he had an understanding with Trump. Apparently, according to the reports, which can't be confirmed, he offered what I would consider irresponsibly lenient terms for a ceasefire to Trump in Anchorage, that if the Ukrainians pulled out of Donetsk and Lugansk, they would freeze the line of control to Kherson and Zaporozhye, the other two oblasts that Russia now considers Russian territory. If that offer had been accepted, we'd be talking about exactly the kind of DMZ kind of division of Ukraine that I think is the ultimate American goal. Trump can't even deliver on that. Those are the maximalist Russian demands. Actually, they're less than minimalist demands, according to the Russian position. Yet he offered those and was even offering, according to reports that can't be confirmed, even more lenient terms if the Budapest summit had taken place. Now, maybe this was designed to be rejected. Maybe Putin was offering these terms so that they would turn them down and say, well, okay, fine, we tried, and now we're just going to have to do what we have to do. But I think that's still an open question. I think, unfortunately, go through several more rounds of this little dog and pony show where they say, oh, well, now we're going to talk about peace. We're moving toward a settlement. Vladimir and I have an agreement, when, of course, they don't.
Yeah, that's important to note. I do want to pivot. Like I kind of alluded to before, this war machine constantly needs new conflict. I don't see many people talking about this because I guess to be fair, it was kind of made in reference of, I will speak about this another time, but this Pete Hegseth Quantico generals meeting. It's important to note, he didn't say anything about Russia. He didn't say anything about Iran. But what he did say was that we needed to prepare to deter threats within our hemisphere and with China. And I think we have now drone striked 10 boats, some off the Pacific coast of South America, and then some on the other side. We don't have any evidence that these are actually what they are deeming narco terrorists. You have this report that came out of Trinidad and Tobago, where you have the families of men who are alluding that their sons were essentially murdered on these boats. So I would want to play this short clip and discuss this kind of pivot that we're doing to other regions to continue this war machine. I think once we have this kind of kicking the can down the road, this deal with Gaza and Israel, that's kind of, that chapter's closed. We're going to have, make a lot of money building these high rises in Gaza someday. So we've secured that spot. And then you also have the same thing in Ukraine. You have the same organization that made the Gaza Riviera plan, or the truth, yeah, I think it's Truth Gaza. Pardon me, I can't remember the correct acronym that this
Yeah,
British
yeah.
Boston Consulting Group made. This Boston
Mhm.
Consulting Group is actually heavily tied to the rebuilding of Ukraine as well. So you have these continued characters that show up on the scene
Mhm.
that serve to make a lot of money when you destabilize a region. So I would just want to go ahead and play this clip for us, and we can start to talk about what's happening in South America.
Fishermen and seamen are being urged to slow down and stay close to shore amid fears of being bombed by the United States military, which continues its anti-narcotics operations in the Caribbean Sea. The warning follows the deaths of 2 local fishermen, Richie Samaru and Chad Joseph, who were among 6 people reportedly killed when the U.S. bombed a small vessel it claimed was carrying narcotics in international waters earlier this week. Fishermen and Friends of the Sea Corporate Secretary Gary Aboud condemned Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessa and her government for previously supporting U.S. missile strikes on suspected drug boats. Aboud says it is frightening that TNT's leader would endorse such actions, calling her comments outrageous and unbecoming of a senior counsel.
So, what is your take? I'm very annoyed that we are in this position again. During the first Trump administration, we saw this very strange attempt at a coup with just anointing Juan Guaido as the leader. And when you had non-government, would you call them election overseers that went to Venezuela, and they said that the election process was actually more secure than Americans' election process. There was 3 different.
That's not hard, Morgan.
It's not. Yes, it is not a tough ask, but it's very important to note, because the same government, the American government, sitting there saying, claiming this election is illegitimate, and you have a non-government actor saying, we may need to look at the way we do elections, because that one was very secure. Just this. Now this is our enemy. I see that it had been building up for years. America country does have a serious problem with drug addiction and the lives that are lost from that. And it is really certainly being exploited by pushing this new conflict. What are some of your takes? Do you see, I don't see a conflict with Venezuela being something easy. And it actually being something where you have a lot of American men and women coming home in caskets if we continue around down this road.
Yeah, I don't know how that's likely to go. I mean, obviously Maduro has kind of, bared his throat and pled for mercy by offering Trump, the sun, moon, and the stars when it comes to Venezuela oil and things like this. Mm-hmm. So I think they're obviously concerned, maybe not necessarily because they think they'd lose, but because win or lose, it would be devastating for Venezuela. So they've been making the offer. It doesn't look to me like it's likely to be accepted. Who knows? Maybe at some point we'll hear we're calling off the attack because the Venezuelans have agreed to become, an American 51st state run by ICE or somebody. I don't know who's going to run Venezuela if we took. They go. Got to secure the oil. Got to secure the oil. So maybe there's that. I think there are a number of things going on here. I've been amazed talking to friends, really intelligent, well-informed people who see through all the other scams, whether it comes to Ukraine or the Middle East or the Balkans in the 1990s or Syria or Iran or Iraq, all that. We all saw how all the lies were being told, blah, blah, blah. And they're swallowing hook, line, and sinker everything that's being told about Venezuela. Well, fentanyl, all these drugs are coming in, I just don't get it. How many times do you have to see the same damn movie and finally realize, yep, it's the same thing? The fentanyl in this case is just the, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq or genocide in Bosnia or whatever, whatever the, Muammar Gaddafi's, Viagra-fueled rape troops or something. I mean, they've always got something that they claim is the pretext for the war. Saddam, Assad's chemical weapons. So now we're hearing the story with fentanyl that at least is within screaming distance of saying, well, it has something to do with the United States. But of course, I think it's the same kind of lies we've been told in the past. I've heard from people say, well, actually, we tried to give these boats warnings and interdict them and take possession of them. I've seen no indication that that's true, that they're simply being surveilled from whatever means we have and then struck without warning, and the people on them killed. You'd think if they really were carrying drugs, you would want to interdict them, be parading them out there, showing the drugs, arresting the perps and all that kind of thing. You don't see them doing that. You don't see them going to the place that the boats are going to and seizing whoever they're going to deliver the drugs to. You don't see that happening either. So I think the whole thing is a scam. But because, the Cheeto Messiah is telling us this is true, there are not an awful lot of people, who are going to accept this because he's the great patriotic hero for the real America, as opposed to all those, woke rainbow people on the Kamala Harris side. So, I think part of this is the divisions we have in this country, that there's, 35, 40% of the population that will believe literally anything he says and will support whatever action of aggression we take against any country based on whatever excuses they want to give. Again, we've seen this movie so many times before, and we're about to see it again.
Yeah. I think the most alarming thing is that this is just so blatant. You have members in the Senate who are coming out and saying, we didn't vote for this. And you can't just conduct strikes in international waters and sometimes in the territorial waters of another nation without, our acceptance or even, us to have this vote on it. And it's just being done just brazenly. With Obama, those drone strikes, those were highly criticized, rightfully so. There was always this different pretext of it being this war on terror. And now we're extending this war on terror to be narco-terrorist, which is very, very concerning, especially when you see this different type of pivot that I think is happening after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. You have members of the Trump administration that are drawing the connection between 9/11 terrorists to the left-wing radical terrorist, domestic terrorist. So you have this another acceleration of this police state that they're trying to accelerate, where you have Trump administration now declaring Antifa this terrorist organization, but can't really articulate how we distinguish between Antifa and what they are, and the names of the groups or direct terrorist attacks that they've committed on American soil. So that aspect is very, very alarming that we see this. I make this reference that regardless, this bipartisan push for a police state. We saw this during the Biden administration with the 2024 DOD directive that allowed the Secretary of Defense, now the Secretary of War, to allow military troops to work with law enforcement, even in the case of it being lethal against American citizens. But you had, rightfully so, right-wing people or people that espouse to this MAGA movement critiquing it. Basically pulling their hair out and screaming and saying that this is this fascist takeover. And now it's flipped, now you have Trump that's actually using this DOD directive, allowing National Guard to go into these places, boasting that they're going to go into different territories. I know that it was legally kind of allowed in the District of Columbia, but now that we're extending it to actual cities, it's alarming and actually potentially illegal. But it's flipped. Now you have the left that are screaming that this is fascist, and then the right that are cheering it on. How do we reconcile that? How do we get to kind of this stop ending in these echo chambers that is ultimately affecting American citizens, because it's more authoritarianism, more surveillance that is going to be pushed regardless of who you vote for in office.
Well, as they say in sports, let's go to the tape. Let's remember back during the summer of Floyd when the entire country, all of our cities were in flames. You had actual Antifa goons out on the street, BLM, and all the rest of our cities were being burned down, and the federal government did nothing about it. Nothing. Wait, who was president at the time? What was his name? Donald somebody was president at the time. Didn't do a thing about it. Now, let's not kid ourselves. A lot of our cities are hellholes. A lot of these blue run cities are, just, open drug markets, people, living and crapping on the street and all sorts of things like that. They're a real mess, and they're a time bomb as far as I'm concerned. I don't take it at face value, though, that they're putting troops on the street in order to take care of the crime problem, which, by the way, is not a federal responsibility anyway. And as you point out, yeah, they can do that in D.C. because it is a federal thingy, as opposed to these cities out in the rest of the country. So I think, yeah, I think what's going on is we are seeing a flipping of the script where a lot of the people on the right, or whatever you want to call it, who were very skeptical of, cancel culture and hate speech and everything else, are now all for it when it comes from, quote, our side, whatever our side is. And I think, and even going so far as, for example, endorsing this huge surveillance system that's going to be set up under Palantir, Peter Thiel and his buddy J.D. Vance and all the rest of it, to keep everybody in a complete transparent box when it comes to government information. And they're cheering it on. I mean, all the stuff that they denounced when Joe Biden was in office, and properly so, they're cheering on because they think it's going to be used against, quote, our enemies, because we're in power now and we're going to use the power of the state against those people. It is amazing the extent to which people can be manipulated. And again, let's not kid ourselves. If we have if the next president is a Democrat, it'll get ratcheted up even farther than being used against the same people who are cheering it on now. And they don't see it. And I think the reason is that I think what nobody wants to admit is that not just on a civic or economic basis, but just on a basic societal approach, this country cannot be put back together again. That the differences between Americans are so irreconcilable that something fundamentally is going to happen to cause the collapse of this country. First, the global American empire, the gay, but also then internally in the United States, something like what the Soviet Union went through in the 1990s. I don't think that's avoidable. I think that's baked into the cake. And what we're seeing now with, Trump derangement syndrome or Trump worship syndrome are simply two sides of the same coin, where you've got two tribes lining up on either side of a divide that's much, much more fundamental than what happened in 1861. And I don't think there's any way out of it.
No, I'm glad that you kind of make that reference that both of these sides are so hyperbolic and dramatic that it almost it turns off the center of the population from even being involved. They just get so annoyed with the mudslinging or the extreme rhetoric that's used that these the left fascists, the right fascists, that it just is so distasteful that they don't even want to be anywhere near or understanding what's happening in the political realm, which is ultimately affects them.
And by the way, I'm glad you made the reference to Charlie Kirk, because I think Kirk is sort of like going to be the the bloody shirt being waved by one side of this divide against the other. And as far as the middle goes, I think that middle is going to get smaller and smaller as the polarization continues. So that there really isn't much. I get very tired and frustrated sometimes when you hear well-meaning people saying, "Well, can't we just be nicer to each other? Can't we just get along? Can't we just talk nice and sort of all come together as Americans?" No, we can't. We just don't live in the same mental and moral universe. Yeah, I know. Well, I hate to disappoint you, Morgan, especially since I have one big advantage on you. I'm old and you're not. And your life is going to suck. There's simply no two ways about it. It's just going to be that way. And there's nothing. Look, the America I grew up in was a very great America, and it ain't going to be made great again. Not the way I knew it.
Yeah, I think that's that kind of circles back on our initial disagreement that we had at the Russian embassy. Is that I was, saying that this is certainly a fight worth having. I acknowledge these huge hurdles, and I wish to get back to a respect of this republic.
Sorry. Well, which republic you're talking about? The first one died in 1865, and the next republic died sometimes over the next 100 years or so till we got to the 60s and 70s. There ain't no republic no more. It just ain't. And look at the good news. I mean, if back to our previous discussion with the Russians, if they really screw things up and blow up the whole world, you won't have to worry about this stuff.
Oh. Well, Jim, like you said, I'm young. I still have things that I want to accomplish in life.
Well, just remember, Morgan, every silver lining has its dark cloud.
Yeah, that's true, I guess. And you definitely make me aware of it. Well, Jim, I want to end this. We can have some concluding remarks. This conversation, we covered a lot of topics, and I think the ultimate, what I come with is that I still push and see this glimmer of hope of democracy and diplomacy. I see my generation as not being hoodwinked like an older generation is. Someone had made this reference that it took a couple years to start questioning 9/11. It took a couple days to question the events of Charlie Kirk's assassination, and that's still going on. So you see this real it's just blanket distrust of what the government has to sell us. And I think that's a lot to what you kind of allude to, is that it's not the America you grow up in. We don't have the same prospects. We don't have the same kind of uplifting future to look forward to, career that's going to make all, this single family income, this nuclear family, all of this has really been chipped away at by our media, our culture, and the policies that come out of Washington. So that's what I see as a glimmer of hope, is that you see my generation, that we are an understanding of kind of who, not, I wouldn't say their true enemies are, but who to go to side with that is not in our best interests, or who to come together and understand that, this person is not an interest. And I think you see that with the younger generation as well, where you have a lot of the left and the right leaning people that are questioning our allegiance to Israel, just outright. And that's kind of something that brings the people that would vote on different spectrums of the ballot together. So that's what remains hopeful in my end, is that there is.
You kids with your hopium. Look, you ever heard the expression, they're lying to us. We know they're lying to us. They know we know they're lying to us, and we know they know we're lying to us. In other words, that in some ways tyranny becomes even more potent when everybody sees right through it, and you can damn do about it. They're going to shove it down your throat, and you can't do anything about it. And again, I just don't think that's going to change. I think there are no mechanisms, there are no levers. Democracy. Give me a break. Who are you going to vote for? The Republicans or the Demopublicans? I mean, they're both carrying. Who was it? Law in the 30s said, you got American politics is like a restaurant. You got a row of Democratic waiters on the right and a row of Republican waiters on the other side, but the grub is all served up in the same, all cooked up in the same Wall Street kitchen. So the people who are in charge, and the rest of this is a shadow show to keep us hypnotized or fighting with each other. But I think that underneath that, the difference in values is very, very real, and that's not going to get fixed. I mean, by the way, one of the things you see with that in your generation is you'll notice that political opinions among males and females are much more radically right and left than they are among older people. I mean, okay, you seem to be a very respectable young woman. You don't have a septum ring in your nose. You don't have blue hair and all that kind of stuff. So maybe you're sane, but a lot of the young ladies your age are not sane, and a lot of the young men on the right are very kind of messed up too in their own way. So it's that doesn't bode well for the future. And as you point out, where are people getting married and forming families and having kids? I mean, look at the birth rates. I mean, we're just talking about on a biological level, this country is starting to fail.
Yeah. Well, I will remain to be naive and hopeful, because that's what gets me to the next day.
Well, that's your job. I commend you for it.
Well, Jim, it has been a pleasure, and I want to encourage every single person watching to join us next week. Senator Black will be joining us again, and I'm sure we will have a lot to talk about. So thank you, Jim. Have a good day.
Thank you, Morgan.